I wasn't going to talk about this because I know that some of y'all get twiggered, okay? Um, but let's talk about this. Let's wake this up a little bit. I get immense egg vibes from this video, but I think I get those vibes because I've dealt with a lot of people like this in my life over the years. And most of these people are transgender women. There's a certain type of outwardly presenting homosexual man who has, at some point in his life, very seriously considered whether or not he may be transgender, right? And some of this comes from growing up in a situation where their own gender nonconformity is something that may encourage some of the people around him to maybe suggest that he transition, and it gets into his head and he questions whether or not he should. But because he comes from like a very binary black or white sort of background, he eventually will reach the point where he feels like he absolutely should not. And then he will also take on the mentality of there's a very distinct line for this and there's a very distinct line for that. And trans women are somehow violating a line, somehow violating those things inside of their head that they were thinking about. And I think there's a bit of jealousy with that, with the fact that a transgender woman, instead of doing what he did, deciding, oh my God, I'm not going to actually transition, even though I know it's who I want to be. There's a bit of jealousy seeing people who have, right? And so these people end up being the kind of people who endlessly attack transgender people whenever they have the opportunity to. So these are the kind of people who will out you, right? These are the kind of people who, if you're at a party and a man buys you a drink or starts giving you attention because he's bitter, it's not happening to him, because he's bitter that, the idealistic heterosexual men that he idolizes are interested in trans women, but not him. He's going to be the guy who, whispers, oh, that's a man, right? Oh, that's a man, right? Because these are people who are unhappy with themselves in a way that is very profound. And some of these people will eventually get to the point where they stop hating from outside the club. They go to a doctor, they get their little estrogen, and suddenly they've completely changed how they feel about everything, right? Some of them, but a lot of them won't. A lot of them will remain miserable. And do you know why this is really obvious to me? Because, when I transitioned, I very briefly remember a time where I was very invested in other people's gender. I talk about this every time I talk about, trans medicalists and things like that, because, and I think most trans people experience this, when you're happy in your gender, when you have transitioned or you have, been in your path for quite some time, it becomes kind of hard for you to quite genuinely maintain that part in your brain that polices other people's gender. Because why would it matter? You are who you are, and you're no longer really dealing with, see, when you're somebody who is traversing gender and you're somebody who is, obviously in their own way representing gender nonconformity, you stand out, right? You stand out. And that is a constant thing that you are always aware of. And so whether you end up being a bitter gay dude or a, true medicalist, true scum type person, you are always trying to police these very black and white ways of looking at things because that's what's going on in your own mind. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the trans women who come out and say, oh my God, you have to look like this to be trans. You have to have these surgeries to be trans. It's not a coincidence that those trans women tend to look a certain way. Because these are people who are very intimately aware of how gender nonconformity makes their life less safe in some ways. And so you could either embrace that you're a man and not transition, and maybe have a bit of gender nonconformity, like long nails that you clack in front of the, the camera or whatever. Or you can be a transgender woman who passes and is a transsexual and all this bullshit, right? And that's kind of, in their minds, the two paths. And if you're not one or the other, you're a disruptor. And they're projecting society's issues with them onto other people. That's why this gay man with nails is standing around talking about trans women in the women's restroom. And the reason I made that video, and the reason I hate this topic, if you followed me on YouTube, you know I've talked about it so many fucking times. But the thing that's fascinating about this is that people over dramatize something that is routine to me. The way that I hear these conversations is like, transgender women should never be allowed to use the crosswalk. People who use the it's crazy to me, because I need to use the restroom. It is just something that I have to do. If I want to leave the house and I want to go somewhere, I'm going to have to use the crosswalk at some point. If it was politicized for me to use the crosswalk, if people said trans women who use crosswalks are more likely to be rapists, that would be a very obvious expression of, we want you to stay the fuck inside. We don't want you to go nowhere. We want you to stay the fuck inside. And I know that when you are gender non-conforming, you feel that way to some degree. You feel that social pressure of, you need to either be in one of these boxes, or you need to get the fuck out of here. And the way that some people cope is by taking on these black and white perspectives, right? It's always been very obvious to me that men like this, gay dudes like this who say this shit, and, your true medicalist trans woman are kind of both doing the same thing, right? They're trying desperately to project their own anxieties onto other people. And it does come from a very real place. We do live in a culture that is very cis-centric, and sort of expects for men to be like this and women to be like that. And if you're going to be a woman, you need to be this type of woman, right? It is what it is, right? Like, I get egg vibes from this video. I get vibes that, like, this is a person who just didn't remain true to themselves. And, it's also very obviously a grift, okay? But there's a reason why someone like that is making content like this. Anyway.